The clock on the emergency room wall showed 11:47 p.m. when Carlos walked through the automatic doors of Mercy General Hospital. His work boots squeaked against the polished floor as he made his way to the reception desk. The fluorescent lights above made everything look harsh and cold. Carlos pressed his hand against his chest, trying to ease the crushing pain that had been getting worse all evening. Behind the glass partition, the receptionist barely looked up from her computer screen. Her fingers clicked away at the keyboard while Carlos stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The pain in his chest felt like someone was sitting on him, making it hard to catch his breath. "Excuse me?" Carlos said, his voice strained. "I need to see a doctor. Something's wrong with my chest." The receptionist finally glanced up, taking in his appearance. Carlos still wore his construction clothes from the job site where he'd been working a double shift. Concrete dust clung to his jeans, and his hands showed the calluses and small cuts that came from years of manual labor. His shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat. "Insurance card and ID," she said in a flat tone, sliding a clipboard through the window opening. Carlos fumbled in his wallet, his hands slightly shaking. "I don't have insurance right now. I'm between jobs, but I can pay cash. This really hurts." The receptionist's expression didn't change, but Carlos caught the slight eye roll. She'd seen this before, or at least she thought she had. Another uninsured worker looking for pain medication or trying to get free treatment. Fill out these forms completely. Every section. Then take a seat and wait for your name to be called. Carlos took the clipboard with shaking hands. The forms seemed endless. Pages of questions about medical history, insurance information, and emergency contacts. He found an empty chair in the waiting area and started filling out the paperwork, stopping every few minutes to press his hand against his chest when the pain intensified. Around him, the emergency room buzzed with late-night activity. A mother held her crying toddler who had a fever. An elderly man sat with his wife, both looking worried. A college student had obviously hurt his ankle, probably from too much partying, but when the staff looked at Carlos, he could see something different in their eyes. Judgment. Two nurses walked past his chair, their voices low but not quite low enough. "Another one looking for drugs, probably," one said to the other. "Third one this week. Same story every time. Chest pain, no insurance, wants to be seen right away." Carlos wanted to speak up, to tell them this was different, that he'd never asked for pain medication in his life. But the crushing sensation in his chest was getting worse, and he could barely concentrate on the forms in front of him. When he finally finished the paperwork and returned it to the desk, the receptionist told him to wait. And wait he did. For 2 hours, Carlos sat in that uncomfortable chair, watching other patients get called back. People who had arrived after him were seen first. Each time a name was called that wasn't his, the pain in his chest seemed to get a little worse. By the time they finally called his name, Carlos was having trouble sitting up straight. The pain had spread to his left arm and he felt nauseous. A young nurse led him to a small examination room and told him to change into a hospital gown. "The doctor will be with you shortly," she said, not making eye contact. Dr. Williams entered the room 20 minutes later, already looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. She was tired. It had been a long shift and she'd already dealt with 3 patients she suspected of drug-seeking behavior. When she saw Carlos sitting on the examination table in his hospital gown, his work clothes folded neatly on the chair, she made assumptions. "What brings you in tonight?" she asked, not bothering to sit down. Carlos explained about the chest pain, how it had started earlier that evening and kept getting worse. He described the crushing feeling, the way it hurt to breathe, how his left arm was starting to feel numb. Dr. Williams listened with half her attention while she looked at his chart. No insurance, manual laborer, probably hasn't seen a doctor in years. She'd heard similar stories before from people looking for prescription pain medication. "Any history of drug use?" she asked bluntly. Carlos looked confused. "No, I don't use drugs. I'm telling you, something's really wrong. This pain isn't normal." Dr. Williams performed a quick examination, listening to his heart for less than 30 seconds, checking his blood pressure, looking in his throat. She didn't order any tests. She didn't take an EKG. She didn't ask about family history of heart problems. "Your vital signs are fine," she said, though his blood pressure was actually slightly elevated, and his heart rate was irregular. "This looks like anxiety to me. Stress from work, maybe some muscle strain from heavy lifting." I'm going to prescribe some ibuprofen and recommend you get some rest. Carlos couldn't believe what he was hearing. Doctor, please. I've never felt anything like this before. I know my body, and something is seriously wrong. Dr. Williams was already writing on her prescription pad. Anxiety can cause very real physical symptoms. The chest pain you're describing is classic anxiety. Take these pills, get some sleep, and if you're still concerned in a few days, see your regular doctor. I don't have a regular doctor, Carlos said desperately, and this isn't anxiety. I know what stress feels like, and this is different. But Dr. Williams was already heading for the door. The nurse will give you discharge instructions. Take care of yourself. The nurse who came in to process his discharge papers barely spoke to him. She handed him a sheet of paper with basic instructions about rest and stress management. No follow-up appointment was scheduled. No warning signs were explained. No one told him what symptoms should bring him back immediately. Carlos got dressed slowly, his chest still aching with every breath. As he walked back through the emergency room, he noticed how the staff watched him. Some looked annoyed, as if he'd wasted their time. Others seemed satisfied that they'd handled another drug seeker appropriately. At the billing window, Carlos paid the $500 emergency room fee in cash, money he'd been saving for his daughter's school supplies. The clerk took his money with the same disinterested expression everyone had worn that night. Walking to his old pickup truck in the parking lot, Carlos felt more than just physical pain. He felt humiliated and dismissed. But worse than that, he felt scared. Deep down, he knew something was seriously wrong with his body, and no one had listened to him. As he drove home through the empty streets, Carlos pressed one hand against his chest, trying to ease the pain that seemed to be getting worse with every mile. He thought about his wife waiting at home, probably asleep on the couch after her own long day at work. How could he tell her that the doctors didn't believe him? How could he explain that $500 had bought him nothing but a prescription for over-the-counter pain pills? The crushing pain in his chest continued through the drive home, a constant reminder that sometimes being poor and wearing work clothes meant your pain didn't matter to the people who were supposed to help you. When Carlos walked through the front door of his small apartment, he found his wife Rosa asleep on the couch, still wearing her waitress uniform from the diner. The TV was on, casting a blue glow across the living room. She had waited up for him as long as she could, but exhaustion from her own double shift had won out. Carlos didn't wake her. Instead, he quietly made his way to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. The prescription bottle from the hospital rattled as he pulled it from his pocket. 3 ibuprofen pills, just like he could buy at any corner store. He dry swallowed them and leaned against the kitchen counter, hoping they would help, but they didn't. The next morning, Rosa found Carlos sitting at the kitchen table, still in his work clothes from the night before. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his face looked pale and drawn. "Honey, did you sleep at all?" she asked, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. Carlos shook his head. "Couldn't lie down. Every time I tried, the pain got worse. Rosa, I think something's really wrong with me." Rosa had been married to Carlos for 15 years. She knew him as a man who never complained, who worked through pain and exhaustion without a word. If he was saying something was wrong, she believed him. What did the doctor at the hospital say? Carlos told her about the night before. The waiting, the quick examination, the dismissive doctor who barely listened to his concerns. Rosa's expression grew more worried with each detail. "Maybe we should try a different hospital," she suggested. "With what money?" Carlos asked. "I spent our savings last night for them to tell me to take ibuprofen." Rosa reached across the table and took his hand. His skin felt clammy and cold. "Carlos, you're scaring me. You don't look right." As if to prove her point, Carlos suddenly gripped the edge of the table, his face contorting in pain. The crushing sensation in his chest had returned with a vengeance, radiating down his left arm and up into his jaw. "Just give me a minute," he gasped. It'll pass, but it didn't pass. Throughout the day, the episodes became more frequent and more intense. Carlos couldn't eat the breakfast Rosa made for him. He couldn't concentrate on the TV. He couldn't even sit comfortably in his favorite chair. Rosa called in sick to work, something she rarely did. She couldn't leave Carlos alone when he was clearly getting worse. She watched helplessly as her husband struggled through wave after wave of pain, each one seeming to drain more color from his face. "Maybe the pills need more time to work," Carlos said, trying to convince himself as much as Rosa. But even as he spoke, Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. By afternoon, Carlos couldn't deny that something was seriously wrong. The pain was constant now, a grinding, crushing weight that made every breath a struggle. His left arm felt heavy and numb. When he looked in the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized the pale, sweaty face staring back at him. Rosa made him lie down on the couch, propping pillows behind his back so he could breathe easier. She brought him water, checked his forehead for fever, and tried to hide her growing panic. But when Carlos closed his eyes and didn't respond to her voice for several long seconds, Rosa knew they couldn't wait any longer. "We're going back to the hospital," she said firmly. "Rosa, we can't afford another emergency room visit, and they already told me it's just anxiety. I don't care what they told you. Look at yourself, Carlos. This isn't anxiety." But before Carlos could argue further, the worst pain yet hit him like a freight train. He doubled over on the couch, clutching his chest with both hands. His face went gray and Rosa could see him fighting to breathe. "That's it," she said, grabbing her purse and keys. "We're going right now." Carlos couldn't argue. He could barely speak. Rosa helped him to the car, supporting most of his weight as they walked, slowly to their old Honda. The short walk from the apartment to the parking space left Carlos completely winded. The drive to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Rosa's life. Carlos slumped in the passenger seat, his breathing shallow and labored. Every few minutes he would grip the door handle as another wave of pain hit him. "Stay with me, baby," Rosa kept saying. "We're almost there." Halfway to the hospital, Carlos suddenly straightened up in his seat, his eyes wide with terror. "Rosa, something's really wrong. I can't breathe right." Rosa pressed harder on the gas pedal, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, Carlos was fighting a battle she couldn't see. His heart was struggling to pump blood through arteries that were almost completely blocked. When they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Carlos tried to get out of the car on his own but couldn't. His legs felt weak and unsteady. Rosa ran around to his side and helped him stand. But after just a few steps toward the emergency room entrance, Carlos stopped. "I can't make it," he whispered. That's when Rosa saw something that made her blood run cold. Carlos's lips were starting to turn blue. She half carried, half dragged him through the automatic doors of the emergency room. This time she didn't wait politely at the reception desk. She didn't fill out forms or answer questions about insurance. "Help us," she shouted to anyone who would listen. "Something's wrong with my husband." The same receptionist from 2 nights before looked up with annoyance, ready to deliver her standard speech about proper procedures and paperwork. But when she saw Carlos supported by his wife and clearly in severe distress, her expression changed. A nurse appeared quickly, took one look at Carlos, and immediately called for a wheelchair. As they rushed him toward the examination area, Carlos grabbed Rosa's hand with surprising strength. "Don't leave me," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. But even as she spoke those words, Rosa could see that Carlos was fading fast. His grip on her hand was weakening and his breathing was becoming more and more labored. The man who had walked into the same hospital 2 nights ago on his own power was now fighting for his life. In the examination room, nurses swarmed around Carlos, checking his vital signs and asking rapid-fire questions. His blood pressure was dangerously low. His heart rhythm was irregular. His oxygen levels were dropping. "How long has he been like this?" one nurse asked Rosa. "It started 2 nights ago. We brought him here, but the doctor said it was just anxiety." The nurses exchanged glances. Anyone with medical training could see that this was no anxiety attack. This was a man in serious cardiac distress. As they wheeled Carlos away for emergency tests, Rosa heard one nurse say to another, "Get Dr. Williams, she needs to see this patient again." Standing alone in the hallway, Rosa realized that the next few hours would determine whether her husband lived or died. And somewhere in this same hospital, the doctor who had dismissed Carlos 2 nights earlier was about to face the consequences of that decision. Dr. Williams was reviewing charts at the nurse's station when she heard the commotion in the emergency room. Another critical patient, she thought, glancing at her watch. It was barely noon, and they'd already had 3 major cases since her shift started at 6 that morning. "Dr. Williams, we need you in Trauma Bay 2 immediately," called out Jennifer, one of the senior nurses. As she walked quickly down the hallway, Dr. Williams reviewed what she knew from the nurse's initial report. Male patient, mid-40s, severe chest pain, Difficulty breathing, blood pressure dropping fast. She mentally prepared herself for what sounded like a textbook heart attack case. But when she pushed through the doors of Trauma Bay 2, Dr. Williams stopped dead in her tracks. The patient lying on the gurney, connected to multiple monitors and receiving oxygen through a mask, was unmistakable. It was the same man she had dismissed just 2 nights earlier. The construction worker who had insisted something was seriously wrong. The man she had diagnosed with anxiety and sent home with ibuprofen. For a moment, Dr. Williams felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Her mouth went dry as the full implications of what she was seeing hit her. This wasn't just any patient in cardiac distress. This was the patient she had turned away. "Doctor, are you okay?" Jennifer asked, noticing her stunned expression. Dr. Williams snapped back to the present. Whatever had happened 2 nights ago, right now she had a critically ill patient who needed immediate attention. She pushed aside her shock and focused on the monitors showing Carlos's vital signs. What she saw made her stomach clench with dread. Carlos's blood pressure was 80/40, dangerously low. His heart rate was irregular and weak. His oxygen saturation was dropping despite the supplemental oxygen they were giving him. These weren't the vital signs of someone having an anxiety attack. These were the vital signs of someone whose heart was failing. "Get me an EKG right now," Dr. Williams ordered. "And call cardiology. Tell them we have a possible STEMI coming up." As the nurses rushed to follow her orders, Dr. Williams approached Carlos's bedside. Even unconscious, he looked like he was in pain. His face was gray and covered in sweat. His breathing was labored despite the oxygen mask. Standing beside the bed was Rosa, Carlos's wife. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a tissue in her shaking hands. When she saw Dr. Williams, recognition flashed across her face. "You're the doctor from 2 nights ago," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You told him it was anxiety." Dr. Williams felt a wave of nausea wash over her. "Ma'am, I need to focus on helping your husband right now. We're going to do everything we can for him." The EKG machine was wheeled in, and within minutes Dr. Williams was looking at a strip of paper that confirmed her worst fears. The electrical activity of Carlos's heart showed clear signs of a massive heart attack. Not just any heart attack, but what cardiologists called the widowmaker, a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery, the main blood vessel that supplies the front wall of the heart. "How long has he been having symptoms?" Dr. Williams asked Rosa, though she already knew the answer. "Since Tuesday night. Since we brought him here the first time." Dr. Williams closed her eyes for a moment. Tuesday night. That meant Carlos had been having a heart attack for almost 3 days. For 3 days his heart muscle had been dying, starved of oxygen and blood. 3 days that could have made the difference between a minor procedure and a life-threatening emergency. The cardiologist, Dr. Peterson, arrived within minutes of being called. He was known throughout the hospital as one of the best heart doctors in the state. But even he looked concerned when he saw Carlos's condition and reviewed the test results. "This is a massive anterior wall MI," Dr. Peterson told Dr. Williams quietly. "When did symptoms start?" "Tuesday night," Dr. Williams replied, her voice barely audible. Dr. Peterson looked at her sharply. "Tuesday? And he's just getting here now?" "He was here Tuesday night. I discharged him." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Peterson looked from the EKG to Carlos's unconscious form on the bed, then back to Dr. Williams. He didn't say anything, but his expression said everything. "We need to get him to the cath lab immediately," Dr. Peterson finally said, "though I have to tell you, after 3 days of this kind of damage, his chances aren't good." As the team prepared to rush Carlos to the cardiac catheterization lab, Dr. Williams found herself standing in the hallway, watching them wheel away the patient she had failed. Around her, the normal bustle of the emergency room continued, but she felt like she was in a bubble, separate from everything happening around her. Jennifer, the nurse who had called her to the trauma bay, approached cautiously. "Dr. Williams, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I have," Dr. Williams replied. "Jennifer, what happened Tuesday night? Do you remember this patient?" Jennifer thought for a moment. "Oh, yes. The construction worker. I remember because some of the staff were complaining about another drug seeker. Said he was probably faking symptoms to get pain medication." Dr. Williams felt sick. She remembered the night clearly now. She had been tired from a long shift. She had made assumptions based on Carlos's appearance, his lack of insurance, his job. She had seen what she expected to see, rather than really listening to what he was telling her. In the cardiac catheterization lab, Dr. Peterson and his team were discovering the full extent of the damage. The main artery feeding Carlos's heart was 99% blocked. Worse, the blockage had been there for days, causing massive damage to the heart muscle. What should have been a routine procedure to open the artery had become a desperate fight to save whatever heart function remained. Back in the emergency room, word was spreading quickly among the staff. The patient they had dismissed as a drug seeker was actually having a major heart attack. The man they had judged based on his appearance was fighting for his life because his symptoms had been ignored. Nurses who had made disparaging comments about Carlos 2 nights earlier now found themselves unable to meet Rosa's eyes as she sat in the family waiting area. The same receptionist who had shown such disdain when Carlos couldn't produce an insurance card now processed his admission paperwork with unusual care and attention. Dr. Williams sat in her office, staring at Carlos's chart from Tuesday night. Her notes were brief and dismissive. Patient presence with chest pain, vital signs stable, physical exam unremarkable, diagnosis anxiety, discharged home with ibuprofen. She thought about all the things she hadn't done that night. She hadn't taken a proper history. She hadn't asked about family medical history. She hadn't ordered blood work or an EKG. She hadn't even considered that a construction worker could have a heart attack. But most importantly, she hadn't listened. Carlos had told her repeatedly that something was seriously wrong, that this pain was different from anything he had ever experienced. And she had dismissed his concerns because of who he was, not what he was saying. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Dr. Peterson calling from the cath lab. "Williams, we've got the artery open, but the damage is extensive. This patient has lost at least 40% of his heart function. If we had caught this Tuesday night, we could have prevented almost all of this damage." Dr. Williams hung up the phone and put her head in her hands. She was a doctor who had taken an oath to first do no harm. But by her actions, or lack of action, she had allowed terrible harm to come to a patient who had trusted her with his life. Outside her office, the entire emergency room staff was talking about the case. It was becoming clear to everyone that this wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a wake-up call about how they treated patients, especially patients who didn't fit their idea of what a heart attack victim should look like. In the cardiac catheterization lab, Dr. Peterson worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew that every second mattered. The thin catheter he had threaded through Carlos's artery revealed the devastating truth on the monitors around the room. The blockage wasn't just severe, it was complete. For 3 days, no blood had been flowing through the main artery that fed the front wall of Carlos's heart. "Balloon ready?" called out the technician. Dr. Peterson guided the tiny balloon to the blockage site. This was the moment of truth. Would the artery respond to treatment, or had too much damage already been done? "Inflating now," he said calmly, though inside he was deeply concerned. He had seen cases like this before, patients who waited too long either from fear or misdiagnosis. The results were rarely good. On the monitor, the team watched as the balloon expanded, pressing against the walls of the blocked artery. Slowly, blood began to flow again through the vessel that had been closed for days. But the victory was short-lived. "His pressure's dropping," warned the nurse monitoring Carlos's vital signs. Dr. Peterson looked at the heart monitor and saw what he had feared. Carlos's heart rhythm was becoming dangerously irregular. The sudden return of blood flow to the damaged heart muscle was causing electrical chaos. Without warning, the monitor showed the flat line of cardiac arrest. "He's in VFib," Dr. Peterson announced, charging paddles to 200 joules. The room erupted into controlled chaos as the team switched from performing a procedure to fighting for Carlos's life. The defibrillator charged with a high-pitched whine that seemed to fill the room. "Everyone clear," Dr. Peterson called out before delivering the shock. Carlos's body jumped on the table, but the monitor still showed no organized heart rhythm. "Resume CPR," Dr. Peterson ordered. "Charge again to 300, one of the nurses began chest compressions while another prepared medications. Dr. Peterson knew they had only minutes before the lack of blood flow to Carlos's brain would cause permanent damage if it hadn't. "Already. Shocking again," he called out. This time, the monitor showed a weak but steady rhythm. Carlos's heart was beating again, but barely. In the family waiting room 3 floors below, Rosa had no idea that her husband had just died and been brought back to life. She sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, surrounded by Carlos's family members who had rushed to the hospital when they heard the news. Carlos's mother, Isabella, sat beside Rosa, holding her hand and praying quietly in Spanish. His younger brother Miguel paced the small room like a caged animal, stopping every few minutes to look out the window at the parking lot, where he had taught Carlos to drive 25 years earlier. Why didn't we bring him back sooner? Rosa kept asking herself out loud. I knew something was wrong. I should have insisted. You can't blame yourself, Isabella said gently. The doctors told you it was anxiety. You trusted them. But Rosa did blame herself. She had seen Carlos in pain for 2 days and hadn't forced him back to the hospital. She had watched the man she loved suffer and had believed the medical professionals who said he was fine. Her phone rang and Rosa jumped, hoping it was news from the doctors. Instead, it was her supervisor at the diner calling to see why she hadn't shown up for her shift. My husband is having surgery, Rosa explained. He might be having a heart attack. Well, when do you think you'll be back? Her supervisor asked impatiently. We're short-staffed as it is, Rosa hung up without answering. How could she think about work when Carlos was fighting for his life? Back in the catheterization lab, the crisis was far from over. Dr. Peterson had successfully opened the blocked artery, but Carlos's heart was struggling to pump effectively. Too much muscle had been damaged during the 3 days without blood flow. His ejection fraction is down to 20%, reported the technician, referring to the measurement of how well Carlos's heart was pumping blood. A normal heart pumps about 60% of its blood with each beat. Carlos's damaged heart was managing only 20%. Dr. Peterson knew that many patients with such severe damage never left the hospital. We need to get him to the ICU, Dr. Peterson decided, and call his family up. They need to understand how serious this is. As they prepared to move Carlos, his heart stopped again. This time, the flat line on the monitor seemed to last forever as the team worked to restart his heart. Dr. Peterson performed chest compressions himself, pushing hard on Carlos's chest, trying to manually pump blood to his brain and vital organs. Come on, he whispered under his breath. Don't give up now. After what felt like hours but was actually 3 minutes, Carlos's heart began beating again. But each episode was taking its toll. His blood pressure remained dangerously low, and his breathing was being controlled entirely by machines. When Dr. Peterson finally emerged from the procedure room, he looked exhausted. His surgical scrubs were wrinkled and his face showed the strain of the past 3 hours. He made his way slowly to the family waiting room, mentally preparing for one of the most difficult conversations a doctor can have. Rosa stood up the moment she saw him approaching. The expression on his face told her everything she needed to know before he spoke a single word. Mrs. Rodriguez, Dr. Peterson began, your husband is alive, but his condition is very serious. Rosa felt her knees go weak, and Miguel moved quickly to support her. We were able to open the blocked artery, Dr. Peterson continued, but the damage to his heart is extensive. He suffered 2 cardiac arrests during the procedure. We were able to restart his heart both times, but each episode caused additional stress to his system. Isabella asked the question everyone was thinking but afraid to voice. Is he going to survive? Dr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. The next 24 hours will be critical. His heart is functioning at only 20% of normal capacity. He's on life support and his body is fighting to recover from the massive trauma it's endured. Rosa found her voice. Can we see him? Yes, but I need you to understand what you're going to see. Your husband is connected to multiple machines. He has a breathing tube, several IV lines, and monitors tracking every vital sign. He's unconscious and will likely remain that way for at least the next day or 2. As Dr. Peterson led the family toward the intensive care unit, Rosa thought about the Carlos she had kissed goodbye Tuesday morning when he left for work. That man had been healthy and strong, complaining only about his demanding boss and looking forward to their daughter's upcoming birthday party. The man she was about to see was fighting for his life because a doctor had looked at his work, clothes, and decided his pain wasn't real. In the ICU, Carlos lay still and pale, dwarfed by the machines keeping him alive. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room besides the mechanical whoosh of the ventilator breathing for him. Rosa took his hand carefully, avoiding the IV lines taped to his arm. His skin felt cold and clammy, nothing like the warm, calloused hand she had held for 15 years. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "We're all here. You just need to fight. Fight like you've never fought before." Outside the ICU room, Dr. Peterson was updating Dr. Williams on Carlos's condition. The news wasn't good. Even if Carlos survived the next few days, his heart damage was so severe that his life would never be the same. "He'll need a defibrillator implanted," Dr. Peterson explained. "His heart function may improve somewhat over time, but he'll likely be disabled for the rest of his life. No more construction work. No more physical labor. He'll be lucky if he can walk up a flight of stairs without getting winded." Dr. Williams absorbed this information in silence. A man who had worked with his hands his entire life would never work again. A father who had supported his family through physical labor would now need to be taken care of himself, and it all could have been prevented if she had simply listened to what he was telling her 3 nights earlier. The long night wore on. Carlos's family maintained their vigil in the ICU waiting room. Rosa refused to go home, even when Isabella offered to stay and call if anything changed. "I left him once already," Rosa said firmly. "I'm not leaving him again." In the ICU, machines continued their electronic symphony, keeping Carlos alive 1 heartbeat at a time. His fight for survival had only just begun. The sunrise on Friday morning painted the hospital windows gold, but Rosa hadn't noticed. She had spent another sleepless night in the uncomfortable chair beside Carlos's bed, holding his hand and talking to him even though the doctors said he couldn't hear her. "The kids are asking about you," she whispered to his still form. "Sophia wants to know when Daddy is coming home to help her with her math homework." 3 days had passed since the surgery, and Carlos remained unconscious, connected to machines that beeped and hummed constantly. Dr. Peterson had warned the family that even if Carlos survived, his recovery would be long and difficult. The damage to his heart was permanent, but something was changing. Rosa noticed it first, a slight flutter of Carlos's eyelids, a small movement of his fingers. The nurses had told her these could be involuntary responses, not signs of consciousness, but Rosa knew her husband. She had been watching him sleep for 15 years, and this was different. "Nurse," she called softly, "I think he's waking up." Jennifer, the same nurse who had been working the night Carlos was first dismissed, came quickly to the bedside. She had been part of Carlos's care team since his admission, and Rosa had seen how the experience had affected her. Jennifer was gentler now with all her patients, more careful to really listen to their concerns. "Mr. Rodriguez?" Jennifer said, checking his pupils with a small flashlight. "Can you hear me?" Carlos's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. The breathing tube prevented him from speaking, but Rosa could see awareness returning to his face. "You're in the hospital, baby," Rosa said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You had a heart attack, but you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." Dr. Peterson was called immediately. After examining Carlos and reviewing his latest test results, he made the decision to remove the breathing tube. It was a critical moment. If Carlos's heart couldn't handle breathing on his own, they might lose him again. But Carlos's first independent breath in 3 days was strong and clear. His voice was hoarse and weak when he finally spoke, but the words were unmistakably his. "Rosa," he whispered, "I'm here. I'm right here." News of Carlos's awakening spread quickly through the hospital. Dr. Williams, who had been checking on his condition multiple times each day, felt a mixture of relief and renewed guilt. He was alive, but she knew his life would never be the same. Over the next week, as Carlos grew stronger, the full impact of his case began to ripple through Mercy General Hospital. The story of the construction worker who was dismissed and nearly died had become a topic of intense discussion. Among the medical staff, Dr. Williams found herself the subject of whispered conversations in the hallways. Some colleagues were supportive, pointing out that misdiagnosis happens to every doctor. Others were more critical, questioning how she could have missed such obvious symptoms. But the harshest critic was Dr. Williams herself. She had requested to be removed from Carlos's care, knowing that her presence might be distressing to his family. Instead, she spent her time researching and reflecting on what had gone wrong. The hospital's risk management team had already begun their investigation. Carlos had grounds for a major malpractice lawsuit, and everyone knew it. The delay in diagnosis had directly caused the severity of his heart damage and his current disability. But something unexpected happened. When the hospital's legal team approached Rosa about a potential settlement, she surprised them with her response. "We want to talk to Carlos first," she said. "This isn't just about money." When Carlos was finally strong enough for a serious conversation, Rosa told him about the settlement offer and the legal options available to them. Carlos listened carefully, his hand resting on his chest where he could feel the irregular rhythm of his damaged heart. "What do you want to do?" Rosa asked. Carlos was quiet for a long time. "I want to talk to the doctor, the one from that first night." The meeting was arranged for the following week. Dr. Williams entered Carlos's room nervously, unsure what to expect. She had rehearsed an apology, but when she saw Carlos sitting up in bed still connected to heart monitors, the words seemed inadequate. "Dr. Williams," Carlos said simply, "thank you for coming. Mr. Rodriguez, I owe you an enormous apology. I failed you in every way a doctor can fail a patient." "I'm sorry." Carlos studied her face for a moment. "Doctor, I've been thinking a lot while I've been lying here. I'm angry, yes. My life is completely changed. I can't work anymore. I can't provide for my family the way I used to. Some days I can barely walk to the bathroom without getting out of breath." Dr. Williams felt tears welling up in her eyes. "But," Carlos continued, "I'm also alive, and I think maybe what happened to me could help other people." Over the next hour, Carlos and Dr. Williams had a conversation that would change both of their lives. Carlos shared his experience of being judged and dismissed, of feeling invisible in his own medical emergency. Dr. Williams listened with a mixture of shame and growing understanding. "I made assumptions about you based on how you looked, where you worked, whether you had insurance," Dr. Williams admitted. "I didn't see you as a person. I saw you as a problem to be solved quickly." "That's what needs to change," Carlos said. "Not just for you, but for everyone who works here." What emerged from that conversation was unprecedented. Instead of pursuing a lawsuit, Carlos agreed to work with the hospital to develop a comprehensive training program about unconscious bias in medical care. Dr. Williams volunteered to be the first to undergo intensive retraining and to help develop protocols that would prevent similar cases. The program they created together focused on several key areas. First, mandatory bias training for all staff, from doctors to security guards. Second, new protocols requiring second opinions for any patient who returned within 72 hours of discharge. Third, standardized checklists for chest pain evaluation that couldn't be skipped regardless of the patient's appearance or insurance status. 6 months later, Carlos returned to Mercy General, not as a patient, but as a speaker at the hospital's monthly medical education conference. He walked slowly to the podium, his movements careful due to his heart condition, but his voice was strong and clear. "When I walked into this emergency room 8 months ago," he began, "I was just another construction worker with chest pain. No insurance, dirty work clothes, probably looking for drugs or faking symptoms for attention. At least that's what some people saw." The audience of doctors, nurses, and hospital staff listened in complete silence. "But I was also a husband, a father, a man who had worked hard his whole life and had never asked for help from anyone. I was a human being in pain and I was scared. All I needed was for someone to listen to me." Carlos went on to describe his experience, the dismissal, the growing symptoms, the near-death crisis that could have been prevented. But he also talked about the changes that had resulted from his case. "Dr. Williams made a mistake," he said, looking directly at her in the audience. "But she also had the courage to admit it and to work with me to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. That's what real healing looks like." The program Carlos and Dr. Williams developed became a model for hospitals across the country. Medical schools began including their story and curriculum about patient communication and bias recognition. Carlos received invitations to speak at conferences nationwide, sharing his experience with thousands of healthcare providers. Dr. Williams also became an advocate for change in emergency medicine. She published papers about unconscious bias in diagnosis and co-authored guidelines for chest pain evaluation that emphasized the importance of listening to patients regardless of their background. The legal settlement that Carlos eventually accepted was modest compared to what he could have received in court. But he used the money to start a patient advocacy program at Mercy General, helping other patients navigate the healthcare system and ensuring their voices were heard. A year after his heart attack, Carlos's physical limitations remained significant. He tired easily, couldn't lift anything heavy, and needed daily medication to keep his damaged heart functioning. But in many ways, his life had found new purpose. "I used to build things with my hands," he told Rosa one evening as they watched their daughter do homework at the kitchen table. "Now I'm building something different. I'm helping to build a healthcare system that sees people as people, not as problems." Rosa smiled and took his hand. "You always were a builder, Carlos. You just use different tools now." At Mercy General Hospital, Carlos's photograph hung in the main lobby alongside a plaque that read, "In honor of all patients who teach us to listen with our hearts as well as our stethoscopes." The transformation that began with one man's dismissed chest pain had rippled outward, changing lives far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in a prescription bottle or an operating room. Sometimes it's found in the simple act of one human being truly listening to another.